theyeshiva.net.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We're up to page Yud Aleph, the first paragraph, third line from the top. Vihine. See, page Yud Aleph, third line, second paragraph all the way on the top. Vihine, Eitzel HaMashpia, by the mentor, by the mashpia, the teacher, kol kamo. Shemala machshavti masalakos mashpa akademas. The more his machshava, his thought ascends, and he removes it from the previous hashpa, he removes his machshava from the previous involvement with what he has been teaching, because of this new hamtza, this new epiphany. Hine hamtza hachadosha miskareves etzle b'yoser. So the new hamtza, the new insight, the new innovation becomes closer to him. Achenitfesas gam b'moyech hadas, until it's grasped even by the part of the brain which we call Daas, which means umargish amitis anakuda, which at that point he feels the true point, the true nekud of it, shehu haklal acher hapratim de Bina. This is the klal, the summation, the nekud, the core, which comes only after all of the pratim, all of the details developed by the part of the brain that we call Bina. Umemela, and thus, us, at that point, the third stage is going to happen. Yifseik hadibur shaloi legamri. His communication to the student will cease completely, v'yishtek mamash, and he will become quiet. Ubazen nase psikas hachiyus legamri eitzel hamakabel, which causes what happens now? A complete interruption of the flow of life and vitality by the recipient, who was receiving his chiyus. He was so alive and enthusiastic and passionate because of this communication, but it now stopped. Sheshama hashpa kedemes meraba. He was listening. He was attuned to the previous hashpa, to the previous flow. The word hashpa we use for the word influence. The actual translation of hashpa in Tanakh, you have an expression, shif asmayim, a shefa. A shefa is like hashpa, a flow of water. There's a flow happening. That flow is interrupted. Like imagine a water current that flows, that's flowing through a brook, through a canal. It's interrupted. V'haya, he was attuned to this. V'haya misaneg, he was experiencing tainuk, pleasure. U'mishtasheya midivrei Rabbi, he was experiencing a lot of delight. Shishu was like toying with it. Right? Shashuyim yoim yoim, Shlomo HaMelech says about Torah. Spielzeug is called in Yiddish. Spielzeug. You know what Spielzeug is? Huh? German, I guess. Umishtasheya medivrei Rabbi. He was completely delightful. He was receiving tremendous delight from the words of his master. V'nivne beparts of shalem midrush prati. And not only it was tainog, it was enjoyable. He was reconstructed, the parts of shalom, with a complete face, a complete new spiritual organism or structure, midrush prati, from even an individual lesson, kamoi shenizboyer la'el barichas, as has been explained before at length. Kanal is kamoi shenizboyer la'el, or kamoi shenisker la'el, or kamoi shenemar la'el, whenever it says kanal, right? Like it was explained before at length. Va'ata, now nifsek hachiyus shaloi legamri, and now the chiyus, this life, this flow of energy and love and depth and wisdom and insight and awareness has become interrupted. At last, the third stage of departure occurred. There is generally, we all know that there are the three cognitive faculties, which are a fundamental idea in Teres HaNister, in Machshava, in Kabbalah, in Chassidus, in all Svarim that deal with this, which is Chachma, Bina, Daas. The famous acronym for it is Chabad. What is the difference between the three? So here we have a summation of it. Chachma, we know, is called the Klal. Bina is called the Prat. And Daas, he says, is the klal after the prat. And what's the difference? Moyach HaChachma is the klal. It's the moment that the person experiences what we call a flash, an epiphany, a barak, a blitz. It's the brainstorm. It's that moment of inspiration. It comes like from nowhere. Chachma is 2 words, koyachma. It comes, you say, what? Like, where did that come from? What is it? What is it? It's still very nebulous. You could still say, ma, what is it? Chachma also comes from a person saying, ma, what? From that deep curiosity and inquisitiveness and openness to something that is new, beyond what you're accustomed to. So Chachma is koyachma on many levels. It's the person saying koyachma, and it is also a koyach that's ma. It's still very unclear. Like mamish, the seed of life. The seed of life that is unleashed. It has tremendous intensity. It has tremendous power, but it's not even close to becoming a developed fetus. It still has to go through a tremendous process. As he said earlier in the Maamar, that tipa, we don't even know its fate. It still has to be differentiated in order to be able to see what is going on here. And in fact, that it may even turn out as a tipa she'ena higenes, she'ena ruya lazriya. It won't be able to take root. It won't be able to meet the egg. It won't be able to fertilize the egg. It may even be emitted completely, may be spit out completely. It's called in halacha pleitas. Pleitas shechvazera. It's spit out, which means it has no place. It could never come into a keli. It could never get into the next stage. Chachma, in many ways, is the critical moment. It's that explosion of energy. The lightning goes off, or the light bulb goes off in your head, and it's a new insight. It's a new hamtzah. It's the koyach hamtzah. All invention comes from that. Literally, like a metzia. There's a pasuk in Mishle we often learn in the Maamar with the Balatanya, v'hachachma me'ayin timotzei. Right? He calls chachma a metzia. Literally means chachma me'ayin timotzei. Where are you going to find chachma? You're going to look in the street and find chachma like you find a pen, or you find something else in the street. Chachma you can't just find in the street. Balatanya says v'hachachma me'ayin timotzei. In the positive, chachma comes from a place called ayin in the soul, which we called koyach hamaskel, which is not really ayin. It's actually pretty loaded. Bases are loaded, but it's ayin in terms that I have no access to it. I call it nothing because it's beyond the conscious horizon. So I have no access. We all look at the sky, and there's the horizon that you could see, what we call the 180 degrees. Beyond that exists. In fact, there's much more what you don't see than what you do see. But in my horizon, in my conscious horizon, it's not here, so I call it ayin. So therefore, a lot of caffeine this morning. So Chachma is that moment of a new insight, and when it comes, it's there. It came in. There's a clarity, there's a sharpness, there's an intensity, and it's always very brief, and it's always a klal. Chachma will never be very detailed. That moment, the aha moment, as we call it. Aha, I got it. What did you get? Usually you got just a few letters or a few words. By definition, it must be that way. Because Chachma always comes as a nekuda. It's a seminal point. The word seminal is associated with the word semen, which is the English word for the tipa that comes from the father, which is why in Kabbalah, Abba is always the name for Chachma, and Ima is the name for Bina. Abba is Tati, and Ima is Mami. Bina is the pratim that come after the klal. Because a klal without pratim is powerful. It may encompass everything, but only in a state of klal. And therefore the klal must be fleshed out, differentiated, categorized. And in that, of course, there are so many details, but it's all about details and nuances and more pratim and more pratim and more pratim. You have the idea, and it's true in everything in life. You have an idea of what you want your house to look like. You have an idea of a new company. You have an idea of a new idea about life. Whatever it may be, a small thing or a big thing. In an inyan, in chachma, in wisdom, or in something else. In Torah, lahavdil, in anything. But it's that moment of the idea which encompasses everything. But now you have to flesh it out and differentiate it and categorize it. Now you got to build a house. So even before you build it, you need that blueprint of drawing. And here you're going to get stuck with a lot of stuff, because when you just have that insight, everything goes. But now when you got to really flesh it out, flesh out the details, this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this is rejected. That's what he says. Sometimes the tipper has no hope. Sometimes certain things you got to get rid of. Sometimes the whole thing you got to get rid of. But the point here is it's time to flesh it out, and here you literally build a full mansion. And there's different floors and different apartments and different components. And the more you do it in Bina, the more developed it can become. Now, you really have it. Chachma, you don't have it, it has you. Chachma is inspiration, Bina is perspiration. Chachma is a klal, Bina is a prat. Chachma is a nakuda, and Bina is never a nakuda. Bina is a nakuda that is now fully developed. Mamish, like what the woman does for the tipper. It's absorbed. It fertilizes the egg. It develops into an embryo. And now it goes through tremendous stages of growth, where that microscopic drop becomes something that is fully developing, and suddenly you'll recognize different limbs and different organs. In a tipper, you're not going to see the difference between a brain and a heart and a kidney and a liver and a pancreas and arms and legs, even though the organism can't function without all of these different components. But as the klal develops into pratim through the woman, Bina Yisera Nitna Be'isha is gifted with koyach habina, details and implementation and practicality. Suddenly this child becomes a miracle. It's always a miracle, but the miracle happens as it takes on shape. And as it takes on shape, there's also differentiation. The head is different than the toe, and the heart is different than the liver, and the nose is different than the ears. And in the differentiation, suddenly you get to see what was in that tippa. That's what koyach habina is. There are different people who are more blessed in one and in others. The people who are gewaldike mamtsiim, gewaldike mechatshim. They know how to come up with new ideas, but they never know how to develop it. And there's others who have a tremendous koyach of bina. They know how to explain and develop, but they can never come up with a new idea. They usually have to steal from the Chachma people, and then they make it a success. You have the concept, when the Chachma and the Bina meet together, it's a powerful recipe. Because very often people who are blessed with right brains are not such good in left brains, and left brains are not always good with right brains. It's very different very different functions. If you live only in the world of Chachma, there's always something new, but it doesn't take root. And if you live only in the world of Bina, things are always being categorized and developed and differentiated and fleshed out. But the koyach of Chachma is the chiddush, the hamtzah. After Bina, you have to come to Daas. And Daas is a critical component. Daas is really synthesizing Chachma and Bina. It's the klal that comes after the pratim. And the klal that comes after the pratim is what we call Daas. And that's what allows a real mastery of the subject. Because in Chachma, you have everything, but you also have nothing. It's the lightning. It's so bright, it's so light, but it's just for 5 seconds. If you could remain in the world of Chachma, you'll have it, but you can't remain in the world of Chachma, because Chachma emerged only because your eye was not present. Because your eye was not present, Chachma can emerge. And that's another element of Koyach Ma. Koyach Ma, it's the Koyach that requires the Ma, the complete submission of the person. You will always see the following fact. The Baal HaTanya writes, Chachma will only happen when you are completely tuned in and focused on the insight, nothing else, to the point that your intellectual ego has been shattered with a complete curiosity and openness and bittul and surrender. Usually a person learns something and he's frustrated, he doesn't understand it. He reads it again and again and again and he doesn't understand it. So sometimes people give up, but this guy doesn't give up and he goes back. And he's just annoyed. It's not he doesn't understand the language. He understands the language, he's reading all the words, it's just it's just not going in. And there's a reason for it. Why is it that if you read the sports section of a newspaper, it has no problem going into your brain? Or people who sit and read the cereal boxes by breakfast, you ever did that as a child, you read the cereal boxes, it goes right in. Or the WhatsApp news items go right into the brain. But here you're reading something and it gets stuck. It's literally hitting a wall. What happened? And the answer from the Chabad Hasidus approaches, if you have a cup of 7 ounces, it can contain water of 7 ounces. If you put it under a huge current of water, it can't contain anything. It resists it. It can't go through this wall. There are parameters. There are fences. Don't allow it in. My brain has a certain shape. It has a certain koyach. I could get things that fit its faculties. If it fits my cup, literally this cup, if it's not a bad muscle, if it fits the cup and the shape of it, and this, I'm good, I'm in. But here's a new idea, a new insight. That's why it's so hard for adults to learn new things. For children, their koyach hachachma is very open, wet sponges, they absorb. But as adults, we learn to be very critical and really discriminate. And very often, this is just who I am. I'm not going to learn anything new. If you can enhance what I know, great. So we listen to things. Oh, it's a new vart. It fits in. I can put it into that filing cabinet. I'm good. If it doesn't fit in, I reject it. Whatever I have the right words for it. Everyone has different words, how they reject things and feel good about it. It could be apicursus. It could be, whatever the cynicism I use, always I have to justify, because I don't want to say I'm just a fearful little baby who's afraid of hearing anything new that may shake up my paradigms and foundations. Who wants to do that? The Sfas Emes writes in Parshas Bamidbar, I think, about the Yid HaKadosh. The Yid HaKadosh was one of the greatest Hasidic masters in Poland, and they called him the Yid HaKadosh. So he says, why did he get this name? Every Yid is a Yid HaKadosh. Yid means a holy Jew. So he says a powerful word. He says that the Yid HaKadosh, every day, he experienced his Yiddishkeit as completely something new, as though he converted this day, as though he became a ger today. He's been a Jew for decades. Every day he started all over again. So they called him the Yid HaKadosh. He just became a Yid, because relative to yesterday, it was like an experience of gerus by him. But it's a powerful insight in life, becoming that new person, like really being open to that newness. Let's face it, it's very difficult. Emotionally, it's so difficult. Because I'm not just saying a new thing, like a new article or a new insight. I'm talking about really new. New for me, new for my life, new for my awareness, new for my paradigm. And there's also, that could come with shame and with guilt and with pain and with regret and with remorse. Like, where was I for 40 years? Where was I? Where was I? So it's not an easy thing to do. Chachma is not an easy thing to do on any level. Because my cup literally has its shape. And its boundaries. What's Chachma? Chachma is literally breaking down the walls of your intellectual ego, which is Talmud Chacham. Yeah. The definition of Chacham is Talmud. If there's no Talmud, there can't be Chacham. That's why you can have a 99-year-old Talmud Chacham. He's still called a Talmud. He's already a Rebbe, already many years, but he's still called a Talmud. Because the world of Chachma is always a Talmud. Koyach ma, what? Children ask what. They don't stop asking what and why on everything. They'll ask you, why is the sky blue? Why is it not green? And why is all the grass green? Why is it not gray? And why is the cement why is the tar black? I don't know, who asks these questions? But there's a reason that the pigment of vegetation is green. There's a reason for it. That's why all epiphanies will always come after. Not always, I can't say always, but they will often come after a moment when I'm frustrated with my own intellectual ego. I'm frustrated with the fact that I'm not understanding it. Not in terms of I'm frustrated in an arrogant way. I'm frustrated in a humble way. And then at some point I'll revisit it. Consciously or even daydreaming. I'll be walking in the street and I don't even realize that I'm thinking about that thing that has been sitting in the depth of my brain and heart. And at that moment I'm completely tuned into the truth of the reality of the subject that I'm trying to understand, but not even focusing on the fact that I'm completely tuned into it. Because I'm focusing on the fact that I am completely tuned into it. I am not really open. But when I am completely tuned in and I'm not aware that I'm tuned in other words, there's no self-consciousness to impose itself on the experience, I become what's called a cholol reikon mamish, an empty womb, an open cavity, an open space. That's what the brain looks like at that moment. And you know what happens then? The walls break down. And as the walls of the intellectual ego break down, what happens? It creates space. It creates space for something that was infinite yesterday, something that was beyond it. And suddenly, whoop, wow, blitz. That's the lightning. It goes off. You cannot consciously force Chachma. Never did it happen in history, as far as I know and I understand, that Chachma can be forced. You can try to facilitate it. You could build all the introductions, all the hakdamas. You know, a mikveh, you can build cisterns and build pipes and build infrastructure. Abasadaf regenen. If it doesn't rain, sometimes they wait months. You have everything. You have everything set up, but you need the rain. And that doesn't depend on you. Huh? You create the environment. You create the environment. Alts. You can add the beach already. Soft music, sunlight, alts. But it needs to rain. There are birds who are male birds who prepare under the water today. You know, there's a lot of research of what we know about male birds who prepare grand structures for their potential mates, for the female birds. And some of them do incredible things. It's like, you know, you can really learn for it what they do to prepare their home and to entice their potential shidduch to come closer. And it's amazing. And then they wait. And then they wait. Because you can't force Chachma. You know why? Because if I'm forcing it, it's not Chachma. It's vitamin me.
What is the avoid of the person?
The avoid of Chachma. The avoid of Chachma is mamish bittel. It's mamish Chachma. Koyach ma. The ability to ma. The person is in a state of ma. Moshe said, Moshe was Chachma. V'nachnu ma. K'min hamayim mishisiyu. That's why it was so hard for Moshe to speak. Moshe couldn't speak Kvat Pek Kvat Lashon, the Balatanya says, because when you're in a mode of Chachma, communication is the worst thing. You ruin everything. Chachma, you're always in a state of Kabbalah, of reception. You're like glued to that which is above you. You're mesmerized by transcendent truth. And communication is the exact opposite. Communication is, I'm assertive, I have mastered, and I'm going to give it to you. Communication belongs to the world of Bina, the world of Daas, much lower states. So Moshe says, Loi ish dvarim anaychi. In halacha, there's an expression the Balatanya always brings, Aidi de tarid lemivla, loi palat. In Hilchas Kashrus, the halachas of Taruvis Kashrus, when you're busy absorbing, you don't emit. It has to do with kashering, extracting blood from meat. So in halacha, there's an exception. When you're busy lemivla, you're busy absorbing the liquid. At that moment, you're not going to be pilot. And Chachma is all about boileya, absorption. So Moshe says, Loi ish dvarim anaychi. I am not a man of words. Kvat peh kvat loshen. Al pi pshat, it just means that he Pashut had a speech impediment, however you explain it. Al pi pnimius, the physical speech impediment came from a spiritual inability to be able to concentrate and focus and harness the words in a way that are going down rather than up.
But he became the biggest Rebbe.
And yet he became the greatest Rebbe. And this week we started to read Eila Hadvarim Asher Diber Moshe, and we have a whole book called Words. Right? It's almost like a paradoxical irony. When Moshe meets Hashem the first time, he says, Loi ish dvarim anaychi. I am not the man of words. But who wrote the book of words? Sefer Hadvarim. The whole Sefer, that's only him. Eila Hadvarim Asher Diber Moshe. So for a man who was not a man of words, he somehow did pretty well in terms of words, to the point that his Sefer of words is studied thousands and thousands of years later, 3,500 years later. And it's words that have shaped society, transformed history and civilization. Not just Jewish civilization, much of civilization. Not bad for Lo Yish Dvarim Anaychi. But it's really Haba Hatalia. Because he was lo yish Devarim anoichi, there's davas seherin. There's what to hear. Because kvat peh, kvat loshen. So the state of Chachma is always a state of complete bittul. I am so frustrated with the present that it triggers within me a commitment that by hook or by crook, I'm going to understand this. And how am I going to understand this? I'm going to tune in. And what does tuning in mean? I'm a cholol reikon, I'm empty, I'm open. No preconceived notions. You know what the challenge was? The challenge was I was trying to understand it. And my fact that I was trying to understand it didn't allow me to get it. Because if I'm trying to understand it, it's not going to go into the I trying to understand it. And yet, if I don't understand it, how do I get it? So Chachma is that state of like complete humbleness and selflessness, where you often, again, you can't realize that you're being selfless and humble, because if you do, it's again a self-conscious experience. That's why you'll often see that epiphanies will happen when you don't expect them. You're sitting on a couch on a Wednesday, and boom, you're walking in the street, boom. People could be in a very interesting place. A person could be in the shower. A person could be just walking in the street. A person could be, I don't know, lying down in bed or reading, whatever it is, but when it's least expected. But you'll notice, if you'll trace back the steps, you'll notice that for the last 10 minutes, your mind was completely immersed. And as that happened, there's an openness in you, and something that's behind your consciousness, the koyach hamaskal, the ayin, can emerge. And there's a flow of consciousness, and it's like, wow.
That's why Moshe could only, before he became the Rebbe, got the ultimate whole Rebbe, because he was not
Yeah. Yeah.
Without that,
Yeah. Yeah. Anav ma'oid is the ultimate quality of Chachma. Hashem said, Misam pella Adam, I will be with you. I'm the one who does it. But Moshe was essentially communicating that which is incommunicable. And that's why Chachma doesn't come into Pratim. Because by definition, Pratim is the way I experience it. Chachma always is the truth in its pristine state. And the way it is in its pristine state is always on the kud. It's not made up of many words. It's not made up of Pratim. It's like a picture. That's what we call raw. You see it. You just see the picture. How long does it take to see a picture? Like this. And you got it. You know, you got that full picture. You see the house. I could tell you, imagine the difference between I describing to you a story and seeing the story. Describing a house and seeing the house. You ever see the difference? Not because your description is not good. It could be the best description in the world. But description, by definition, is coming from a place where you're not fully present. You don't see it. The thing is not revealed. Somebody else is sharing it with you. In Chachma, it's the moment that the truth is revealed. But here's the problem. The truth transcends my brain. And therefore, my brain actually, to some degree, shut down in order to be open. And now, it absorbs it. It comes in. And that's why it feels very good. The moment of Chachma has a special timing, like a special pleasure, that moment, because like, wow. But if you stay with that moment forever, you're great, but you can't stay in that moment, because that moment was a moment of bittul, of transcendence. Now you have to go back to yourself. The problem is you go back to yourself, and you lose it. It has you, but you don't have it. Bina means you have it. But as the you emerges, the Chachma is not here anymore. So now you have to take that lightning and based on its light, figure out where to go. So now it's Rav Ayisapra. Now once you saw it, you can begin to tell the story. The problem is telling the story is much more frustrating. Because now you go detail by detail. It's called reconstruction. You have to reconstruct the picture. But it's a necessary tool, because if you don't reconstruct it, there's no maintenance. There's nothing to do with it. It was too powerful. It was too overwhelming. So now it's all about reconstruction of that seminal idea and building it into a full-fledged reality. And that means there's a foundation, there's a first floor, a second floor, a third floor, and maybe a skyscraper that's 166 floors when you're finished and you're done. And now you come in and you're like, wow. And every pipe has its space. and every electrical circuit has its place. And the plumbing, and there's the electricity, and there's the foundations, and etc., the interior and the exterior, ultimately till the last finalized touches, and you have here a full mansion. This is Bina, all about Protim. But now you have to have Daas. What's Daas? Daas is critical, because Daas is, what often happens is people see the trees and they lose the forest. Daas is going back to Chachma after Bina. And that means, sometimes this is very common, for example, in learning Gemara, because it's so many pratim. Person will learn a sugya of Gemara, right? And then you learned it well. Boy is sitting all day and learning it. And then you'll come and say, so tell me the nekuda in a sentence. Well, Abaye said this, or Rava said this, or Reb Nachman said this, or Rabbi Yosef said this. So, no, I got it. Tell me the nekuda. Give me the forest. I know there's 20,000 trees. I got it. And every tree is amazing. And you could sit for 6 months on every tree, especially if you're in a yeshiva where they really try to go deep. They sit on every Rashba, and every Rebbe Akiva Eiger, and every Ramban, and every Ritvan, every Reb Chaim, and every Bercha Shmuel, and every Reb Nachem, and you sit, and every Reb Shmuel, mezitz. So you go deeper into the tree, and deeper, and then you get to the roots. And now you have the roots, and then I say, so tell me about this forest. What forest? That's not learning. It's missing something very essential. The Bina is important, but after, Bina is critical, but after Bina you have to go to Daas. And what's Daas? Daas, as he puts it here, is the actual Nekuda. And it's a very interesting lashon when he describes Daas. He says, Margish amitis ha-nekuda shu aklal achra pratim de Bina. In Chachma, you're also margish the Nekuda. But in Chachma, it's the Nekuda that's beyond Pratim. In Chachma, it's the Tipa before differentiation. In Das, you come back to the Nekuda, and you have the bottom line, the core. I really have it. Now you have it. Because in Bina, there's so many details you can get lost. Das is bringing it all back to Tachlis. What is the ultimate, the real Nekuda? And you could sometimes summarize. That's the power of a kitzer. What's the power of a kitzer? Right? The power of a kitzer is, you just learned. You learned a few pages. Could you summarize it in a sentence? In 2 sentences? It's impossible. Well, if it's impossible, then you didn't get it. You got one detail, another detail. There's no real mastery of it, which always requires much more depth. That's why Das is much deeper. Because Das means you really have to get to the point. Not the fog. And you have to know the difference between the peripheral and the essentials. To get to the Nekuda, you have to be able to pinpoint what is the real point. Because in Bina, it's very easy to get lost in the Pratim. So Das requires that being tuned into the emes, to what's the ultimate truth of it. So that's the klal, the prat, and the klal after the prat. That's why in the formulas of Rabbi Shmuel, how we deduce Torah, you have klal uprat, you have prat uklal, you have klal, prat uklal. And in Shas, it's a whole sugya how that works in Chumash. There's a klal, there's a prat, there's a klal. So in the klal, you have everything. Before the pratim, in the prat, you have details, and then in das, you have the pratim that come after and are born, the klal that comes after and is born from the pratim. And in any new idea, you have to go through these 3 stages in order to turn it into something that is really enduring and powerful. That's why Das is also connected with Dveikus, V'ha'adam Yoda es Chava. When Adam is together with Chava intimately, it says Adam knew Chava, Yoda. It doesn't say he was wise about Chava, or he understood Chava. I don't know if he understood Chava. V'adam, I don't know if that's possible, but V'adam Yoda es Chava. In Tanya and Peri Gimel, he says Das is Loshen, his kashrus v'his chabrus. Shemekasher daitoi bekesher amitz v'chazak ma'oid v'yitka machshavtoi b'choizek v'ene mesich daitoi. We have a concept in halacha called hesach hadas. Das is connection. Chachma is also connection. Bina is also connection. But das is, there's an intellectual intimacy, real connection. You really have it. It's really one with you. In Chachma, you can't say it's one with you. It overtook you. It overwhelmed you. You became subsumed in it. In Bina, you can't say you're one with it. You're still in the middle of figuring it out and developing, and you have all the details. But Daas is like fusion. That fusion between you and the idea. Fusion in a positive sense. In the house? When it's done, yeah, in the house it's like the finished product. B'meila, there can be also relevance. B'meila, there could also be relevance. That's another element, that it's relevant. There's application. Because whenever you get to the real nakuda, you're ready for real application, for practical application. Whenever you get to the nakuda. So that's the pshat. Let's understand that when the teacher is teaching everything we described about teaching, which I'm not going to repeat now, you have to chazer, and he gets a new hamtzah, he needs 3 stages now in his own life, Chachma, Bina, and Daas. And in every stage, what happens? He gets more and more distant from the student. He has to. In the stage of Chachma, which is stage 1, wow, something just popped into his brain. He'll continue speaking. He'll continue speaking. It just happens. Trust me, it happens. You're middle of speaking. It's the best time. That's the time it happens. You wish it wouldn't, but it does. It's because, like we learned before, it's because you're speaking that it happens. Because koyach dibur is koyach schalkus, and koyach schalkus is mavarer. Besides the other explanations, mitalmidei yosem mikulam know it's from betchilasan. But it happens dafka during the shir. It would have happened the day before. He would have been very happy. Didn't happen. He has a script. He's prepared. He went through his whole symptom, and suddenly, boom! He could leave it alone, but he's losing something priceless that will never come back. It's going to go right up in the koyach hamaskal, and it's going to remain dormant there for another 65 years. You can't take chances. When you have a moment of chachma, you can't be confident it's coming back tomorrow. It's not coming back tomorrow. It's just the way it works. It goes way back into the ayin, and it disappears, and you lost it. And therefore, he puts his mind to it. So in the first stage of Chachma, he could still continue speaking. Remember, he's prepared. True, his level of intensity and chiyus is diminished. The student will feel a certain absence, a certain distance, but not to the point that he's not continuing the class. He could continue it. Why? Because what happened was his koyach hachachma became attuned to a new amtzah, to a new insight, and therefore he could still continue talking. Why? Because since it didn't get into pratim and machshava, it didn't get into details, so therefore it does not contradict the ability to be able to continue the communication. Although you will not have the full presence. You can't have the full presence because a part of his brain went elsewhere. But there's stage 2, and that's Bina. And Bina is already, you become occupied with it. And here what will happen is he'll continue to wing it, but as he says, suddenly he might say the wrong words. The words from the other file come in here, and it's like, what? You know, the Gemara describes in Pesachim the difference of nimnum and different types of levels of sleep. Nisnamnemu or nirdemu. So nirdemu is your mamash fully asleep. I talk to you and you don't answer. Then there's a kind of called nim v'loinim. You're awake, but you're not awake. So somebody talks to you, you could sometimes answer, and sometimes you say things, right? And then, why did I just tell that to you? Because I was dreaming about it. So that's because you're in a state of slumber. Here you're not in a state of slumber, you're actually awake. But you're awake in a different realm. So what will often happen is it will affect the actual communication. So he may still continue it, and he's speaking, but that communication may be derailed because of the involvement in the new idea. It's not just that his Pnimius is not there, that the Devarim Hayotzim and Alev is not there, but the Chitzonius is fully fine because he's winging it. But what might often happen is that inner new machshava of Bina will affect the Chitzonius as well. And of course, the student will feel yet a greater absence and a more absence of the teacher and less of the flow of communication. Because again, as he puts it, even if it would be organized and everything in a good day, he has to strain himself. He has to be completely attuned and focused on a good day. But certainly on such a day, which he may call not such a good day because his teacher has something going on, it becomes very, very difficult for him to absorb. But this is only a preparation or only a hint of what's going to come in stage 3. And in stage 3, as it enters from Chachma into Bina, into Daas, in other words, the Hamtzah gets closer and closer until he wants to really get it. Now he must become quiet. There's an abrupt silence. He just can't continue talking. Now there's no multitasking. Yeah. Chachma and Bina, you could still wing it. Yeah, you can't. When you're in a place of Das, it's hiskashrus, you're connected. And you can't be connected to two things that are different simultaneously. We think we could in the modern world, but we can't. Either you're connected to this or you're connected to that. Yeah, Nekudas HaTamtzis is very much Das. And what's Tamtzis? Tamtzis is, in Halach we have Dam HaTamtzis, right? The essence, it's what's squeezed out of everything. Squeeze it out and give me the essence. Take out all the liquid, huh? The concentrated, yeah. That's Tamtzis. And for that you have to have a new Amkus. Das is always associated with depth, Amkus. Because if it's superficial, you will never get the Nekuda. You will have it blurry. Essence, yeah.
Huge fun story comes to me. That was the story of Bina.
You have to remind me.
It's Bina, because it's a little flash that had to come out.
I guess so.
There are two concepts in Das. Like one thing that was Thompson that came up. And something in Das, somebody, let's say, talks about business, teaching business, that's all Chachma and Bina. Somebody is into that line of business and he's teaching it. He's Das.
That's true. That's natural. When you have experience in something, you usually have much more Das. Das is enhanced by experience, because what does experience do? Experience brings you into contact with reality. That's why we have an expression, something called a bardas. A person is a bardas. Not a chacham, not a maven. You have a lot of mevinim, they're called consultants. Experts. You pay them $4,000 an hour and they become consultants. But then there's somebody called a bardas. What's a bardas? Bardas doesn't mean he has encyclopedic knowledge. Bardas doesn't mean he's brilliant. You know what bardas means? Bardas means,
Experience.
He has a real understanding of the situation in all of its ramifications. Yeah. That's why it's so powerful. It's not that he's brilliant. He really connects to the reality and he sees what the results are, what the ramifications are, what the practicalities are. It's applied to reality. In other words, it's real. It's not some abstract idea somewhere with interesting details. On every level, Das is getting to the realness of it. And whatever that means. So if it's a business question or if it's a family question, everything will be taken into consideration. Not just have a brilliant idea. How will it affect your health and how will it affect your marriage? How will it affect your kids? How will it affect your serenity? How will it affect you in a year, in 5 years? It's the full picture. It's always the full picture and seeing the full picture. You'll say, there's an expression in halacha, katan ein loy das. Katan doesn't have das. You have children who are brilliant. You have 11-year-old kids who know more than a lot of adults. Right? But it's still not das. Why? There's a lack of maturity. What does maturity mean? What does maturity really mean? Anybody here is mature who can describe what maturity means? What does it mean to be a mature person? Yeah?
I describe immature.
You can describe immaturity. Yeah. Your child is playing with a knife, and you say, you can't play with that knife, and you explain it to him. Or he's already on his 11th candy or 11th ice cream, right? And you explain to him that it's really not good for you, and you take it away. But he's not impressed. Not because he doesn't understand. He probably understands it better than you. But there's a certain disconnect. I can understand it on one level, but it's not connected. Daas, there's no disconnect. Why? Because when you really teufes the emes of it, you teufes the emes on every level. And that means including the way it applies to real life. That's why Daas is the key for Midos, because Daas is what will make it relevant. Because if you'll get to the core, you will see all of its results. And if it's detached, ultimately you're not getting to its emes.
Is it returning Malchus?
Huh? Well, Malchus is another component. Malchus is the ultimate fruition of it. But here we're talking still the way it's in the mind.
Okay.
Daas is still cognition. It's not yet implemented. But the way it's in the mind, there's a full hiskashras. There's a Adam Yada as Chava. Yeah. So Daas is not experience, but when you have experience, you'll have Daas. Because you won't be able to fool yourself. You just know what it is immediately. You understand? Experience, somebody has experience with something, automatically it facilitates a deeper Das. Because you're not speaking in the heavens. It's not abstract. Yeah. And that's part of being Teufels Amitis Hanakuda. Amitis Hanakuda means you get to the truth of the core. That means also that if there are practical applications, you will touch them. You will touch on them. You won't be able to ignore them. That's always the Maila, in Pilpulim, people have Pilpulim in Halacha, right? How does it lead to practicality? When somebody has to answer a Shaila, they have to go much deeper into the Sugya. Because you can't fool yourself and deceive yourself. Oh, it's a svara. But does this svara carry you all the way to practicality? Sometimes when people, they're in the world of pilpul and more svaras, but there's no practical application, and they're not compelled to do a practical application, you can get away with much more confusion. But when you know this is going to be practically relevant, and somebody calls you and says, so what should I do? Do I do it? Am I allowed to do it or not allowed to do it? It challenges you to go much deeper and really get to the bottom line. So it's not that Das is halacha l'maisa, but it's Das that's critical for halacha l'maisa. Always. Because does this emes hold true in the real world? The fact that it's a nice idea, nice svar, okay, beautiful. So in stage 3 of Das, as the mashpia, as his machshava ascends from the place that he is now in, where he's communicating, in a state of histalkus, his machshava departs. Be'ilui achar ilui. Goes higher and higher means deeper and deeper, more connected to the new level of awareness that has entered into his consciousness. When it enters from Chachma into Bina, there is more distance, but when it comes from Bina to Das, because he really is getting close to it, he will become completely silent. The flow will be completely interrupted. Because when he's in that state of experiencing the Das, the klal after the pratim, it's impossible to be able to continue communicating. Just can't. Now he has to be completely tuned in. Das is not superficial anymore. No compartmentalization. If there's no compartmentalization, what happens? He's carried away and he's abruptly silent, and not another word comes out of his mouth. So from terms of the makabel, the entire flow just ceased. The whole flow that was moments ago serving as the lifeline of the student. This was, as he said, we're talking about a real student, not a student who's just there because he doesn't have what to do in the morning. I don't mean present company. I mean that concept of a student who's just there, he's half present. But we spoke about the Talmud Muvik, who doesn't want to lose a word. When he comes with his full presence, and he allows himself to be reconstructed in all of his 10 spheres. Just like the teacher came down and became present in all of his 10 spheres. It's always quid pro quo. It's quid pro quo. What he brings in, he receives. So he's there with all of his 10 spheres, beginning with his Keser, his Tainuk, his Chachma, his Bina, his Daas, his Midos. He's also ready to change practically on every level. And there's this flow and it's happening and it's awesome. And he's tuned in and he's glued in and boom. First he sees the teacher is less enthusiastic. Suddenly he starts hearing, Jacobson instead of Schneerson. Suddenly he starts hearing fremde Sachen. I don't know where this guy is. Something is going on in his house. And then suddenly, boom, he's not here. Hello, he's gone. He's silent. So the whole flow, the whole chiyus, the whole tainuk comes to a complete interruption. Okay.
Something really struck me that converges to what you were saying about the law project. We've had this before when the Rosh Hashanah Maamar was spoken about.
Yes. Tiku b'choy the shofar l'kut Torah about the whole creation, klal, prat, klal. Moide de kavart.
What's interesting is that the way you explain klal, prat, and klal, when you talk about plot, it's qualitative, meaning klal is a general concept. The forest, the trees, the point of Daas is to go back from it. We shouldn't lose the forest.
The nekuda.
Because prat is a different way of looking at something than klal.
Yes, always.
Looking at it in its original form.
You have to, yeah.
Prat is qualitative. What's interesting is the Gemara so often counterposes klal, prat, and klal to ribuy and miyut.
Yeah.
Ribuy and miyut are very quantitative words. I'm just wondering if you could actually work out Mahala that the whole dispute in the Gemara should you be darshaning
Klal, prat, ribuy, miyut.
is when you should look at these things in a qualitatively Hasidic sort of holistic look, or like a yak, or ribuy and miyut. It's like it's mamas, more or less. Because ribuy and miyut are very quantitative words, and klal prat we're saying are really, really qualitative. When we say it's ke'ena prat, we're not saying it means that we're trying to be mamai in a certain number of things. We're saying we're looking at this in a qualitative rather than quantitative way. So just think about that whole focus every word.
Interesting. Okay, it's to be ma'ayin, the machloikas of ribuy miyut and klal prat. It's a fascinating machloikas to understand the pnimius of it.
Getting maybe a shtickle einstein to look at it.
Yeah. The koyach of pratim is deeper than it's a different faculty. It's like a different part of the brain. I mean, we know it. You see people who are very, detailed oriented, yeah. It's like a different dimension of the brain. You have people who are big picture people. You also have people who are very intuitive. And people who are not intuitive, but they'll schwitz with what you give them. Yeah. Pleasure to have you physically here, not just virtually.
Say the Hebrew is Maase. So that
Maisa? Oh. I think so. In this sense, there's something in Gemara called in Sanhedrin, La Sukkah Shmaitza Alibada Hilchasa. To be able to conclude a sugya with halacha. What's the value of it? The value of it is it challenges you for such a level of clarity that will not exist if you're not compelled to go there.
So practical application.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll see a teacher is a very good teacher and he has good students and everything, but he has no experience with the real world. So he guides his students in a particular way, which may have a lot of value, but as they encounter reality, it becomes very difficult for them because he has no connection with it. Like when you live in an ivory tower and you create a reality, it's great if you could stay there, and he stays there his whole life. That's why it's so important, to be able to have a connection with the world that the student is going to face. Yeah.
I think that there's multiple person can have multiple connections, but the concept of Eisa Tichibri and Klal Yisrael is one. it's a level where you can connect all three at once, so that you don't have to lose both ends.
That's very deep.
Yeah, because otherwise, how do you maintain? I once heard someone describe it as like a bird with his wings that are tied. Years ago, when I was a kid. You understand that? It's real impressive.
Oh, yeah.
Everything doesn't come, it doesn't come.
Yeah.
Pass life without this.
Well, no, there will usually be something that comes. There will be a chachma flow that comes in. It's going to rain at some point, but I cannot predict when, and I can't force it.
You're ready and you're doing things.
Right. No.
The same thing with learning. You know, you can be trying to learn all your life.
Yeah.
Go somewhere in the wrong place, but one day it just boom fits into the place. So,
Friday the Rishi. Friday's the Rishi.
I think so. I'm trying. I'm gonna know tomorrow. Okay, but tzlacha, sei gesund.
We have two guys.
Sollst machen a Sach Geld.
Two guys do the same mitzvah. One guy knows the halachas. One guy's gone into all the depths of all the sugis there. So what's the difference between their two actions?
The action, listen, the main thing, Maisa hua iker, the action is action. But here we're talking about the cognition before the action. In terms of action, the action is an action. A Yid eats matzah, he did a mitzvah. He puts on tefillin, he did a mitzvah. He gives stock, he gave a mitzvah. That's not a question. Some mitzvahs, machlokes, striches kavanah, ain't striches kavanah. A lot of hatzlacha. Pleasure to have you. Of course.
but he has a dream, but he has to get back to the original flow.
Of course. This is all the teacher who has a new idea. Sometimes the teacher doesn't have a new idea, but he's still not present.
But that's a difference.
And that's a travesty. That's not a good thing. But it'll be immediately noticeable in the quality of the receptiveness. It works together, midah keneged midah. The makabel becomes a mirror of the mashpia. If the mashpia is there in all of his 10 spheres, so the makabel will show up in all of his 10 spheres. The heart will trigger the heart. The mind will trigger the mind. The commitment will trigger the commitment. Like we learned before about kamayim haponim laponim.
I learned it very often when you make presentations. If you make presentations like you make just points, people don't get it. Because you skipping the basic Chachma and everything, it just gives straight to like Bina. When you tell a story, and then suddenly everybody's like,
What's the power of a story in presentation? It's the power of Daas. What's the power? You could say the greatest ideas, and everybody is dead.
Also, people want to hear stories.
Huh?
People want to hear stories.
So why is it? Okay, I understand if a person is tired and lazy, just tell me a story. But I'm talking about top-tier people who maybe even be very, accomplished and they're ready to hear ideas. But the story clinches it. Why? I think part of it is that's the koyach of Das. What's a story? A story, you get it from experience.
it's something that anybody can relate to.
Everybody can relate to.
Level. So that's the connection.
It's the connection. And it's relevant. It becomes about real life. It's the idea tested in real life. It doesn't live in an incubator in an island. A story is, in a story there's always the tension, the victory, the triumph, etc.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net chachma.org/donate.